basic and important terms in a country's economy that help us determine different situations in the market. Now, I will try to cover up the most important ones. We'll start with a trade balance, or as it's sometimes called, BOT, balance of trade. It's basically a term that describes the relationship between a country's imports and exports over a certain period of time. A situation in which the value of export is higher than the value of import is called a trade surplus. And if a country imports more than it exports, it will experience a trade deficit or a trade gap. In most cases, a trade surplus is considered as a favourable option, but there are a few cases in which a trade deficit could benefit a country's economic condition. Above all, it depends on a country's business cycle. Now, moving on to GDP. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product and is a major indicator for a country's financial health and its standard of living. It's mostly calculated on an annual basis from all kinds of information, exports minus imports, and consumptions from the private and public sectors. So this is a way of measuring an economic growth of a country. But what happens if the economy suffers from difficulties in growing and instead experiences a decline? Unfortunately, this is a normal situation and it's called recession. The growth slows and you have a downward cycle for at least 2 quarters, usually up to 18 months. Central banks like the ECB, the BOE and the Fed try to fight recession by lowering interest rates and using other fiscal policies in order to encourage back growth. But what exactly are interest rates? They are the percentage of money that we pay in order to lend a specific asset. This stems from the fact that the lender could have gained from owning the asset, but instead he lent it to you, for example. Even banks pay interest rates when borrowing money from central banks. The policies towards interest rates are one of the most critical elements in currency trading, and as a result, they are watched carefully by investors. Central banks can raise their interest rate and thus keeping down the prices of goods in times of severe inflation. Now, inflation is basically a situation in which prices of goods and services are rising too much to an extent that consumers have little spending power. The opposite is called deflation, when prices are going down. That shows that there's less demand in the market and a much higher tendency for assets to lose their value. It is a situation that often occurs during recessions. That's all we have time for now, but do join me for the next lessons where we'll cover other subjects.